In this episode of the Data Defenders Forum, Sylvain and I got to speak to 4 different people about the challenges and considerations related to security, data protection, privacy, and compliance in the context of open source projects. We spoke to Kimmich, who is a technical community architect at the Confidential Computing Consortium, Ollie Cuffley-Hur, who is a senior consultant at ControlePlane, a cybersecurity consultancy, Jorge Turrado, who is an SRE at SCRM Lidi, CNCF ambassador, Keta project maintainer, and last but not least, Núñez García, who is a lawyer at Audens and also an advisor at the Spanish Data Protection Agency. The participants discussed topics such as the difficulties in consensus, common language around these issues, the importance of discovery and data classification, the need for flexible and adaptable data protection processes, and the role of open source maintainers in ensuring security. Let's take a look at the episode and see what our panelists had to say about these topics.
Just want to go around for everyone to sort of, give a little bit of background on some of the things that they're seeing in their day-to-day regarding these issues. And then Sylvain and I have some other questions that we can put out there. So if each of you can just give a bit of a summary, couple minutes about some of the things that have been catching your attention around these issues. And that way we can sort of establish a framework to continue the conversation after that. So that being said, we can start with, we'll just go in the same order. Jorge, if you want to chime in about the things you've noticed being a maintainer in the Keta project, and then also perhaps in your when you're not spending thousands of hours responding to Slack messages, things that you see in your day job in Little.
Yeah, of course. I guess that everybody knows or have heard about Keta, but in the case of not heard about it, basically we do an autoscaler or we create a metric server which could query 60 different upstreams just for extending the Kubernetes autoscaling features. And obviously this means that we have to deal with a lot of different authentication ways depending on the upstream, depending on the provider, depending on customers' requirements. So we decided some time ago to protect every communication. Every internal communication is protected over TLS for sure, because it's required nowadays in Kubernetes. Apart from that, we are introducing a mechanism. Probably today will be released indeed. A mechanism for self-manage the certificate in a better way than just generating a certificate for 5 years and, let's continue with this party. No, we are introducing also a mechanism for using Cert Manager or providing your own certificates and those kind of things, because we think that is a first-class thing that we need to support in this scenario where we deal with a lot of different information. Another thing that we do is we never store any user data wherever. We don't store those data because storing data means that you need to protect the data. So we totally rely on Kubernetes API. And if we need a secret, our users can provide us the secret reference. Okay, the secret is potato and the key inside the secret is tomato. And Keta, instead of storing our own secrets, we totally rely on Kubernetes API just for requesting. So we don't store any secret apart from memory, obviously. We need to store the secrets in the process memory, but that's not any storing for me. And apart from that, other thing that we have faced with the biggest cloud providers is that they have a super nice feature from security point of view, that is delegated identities, zero trust, role assumption, role identity, however the specific cloud provider wants to call it. But at the end of the day, it's the same technology under the hood. Basically, they allow us to federate your own Kubernetes OIDC server, your own Kubernetes identity provider with their provider, and based on that trusted relationship, you can access to the infrastructure. That's another feature that we found and that we trust on it, and we try to improve and to push to our users to go there, because for me is the most safe, the safest option in cloud providers. So basically, our threat protection model is we don't store any data. So we transfer those responsibility to the end users. They are the responsible of storing and managing their secret. We don't access to any other secret. We are really strict in that way. We only query or we only get the minimum needed information. I mean, if you are scaling based on Prometheus or based on AWS CloudWatch, whatever, we only do it. We don't manage anything. We don't do anything related with management because that opens the door to having to do weird things and to escalate the privilege in some places, and it's risky. And obviously, it's totally outside our target and our goal as project. So that's the second point. And the third one is we try, when it's possible, we try to introduce every standard in the sector, in the tech area for adding security, like federating or supporting federate authentications, using TLS. We have deprecated TLS below 1.2. So for us, the minimum acceptable TLS, for instance, is 1.2, because 1.1 and 1.0 are broken. You could use them, but they are not safe. So we try to build our security policy on top of those three things, just for not having problems. Because even if it's not our problem, because we are not a company, we are an open source project, it produces a really, really bad publicity if any user has a leak due to our project.
All right, very good. A couple of things there that we can discuss further, but I think the understanding of almost nowadays, everyone has in some way a security stakeholder, whether they like it or not. And so from your perspective of, there are things we have to guarantee, other things we're not going to get involved in because of limitations of perhaps not having, there could be a knowledge gap there, particularly around the notion of not storing data, and that's the responsibility of the end user. Once again, that this has to be a part of it, even though at face value it might not seem that Keda is a security-based project, but that still has a very strong component there. And obviously we could extrapolate that to other open source projects. In terms of questions, if you got questions, just hang on to them right now and we'll get to them afterwards at the end, just to want to get everyone a chance to share their thoughts. That being said, Ollie, your turn. Things that have caught your attention lately, things that you'd like to comment on.
I think for us, because the data we handle is so diverse, because we've got clients in lots of different highly regulated industries. Our kind of offensive security function, obviously the reports they're generating and the findings they're documenting can be pretty sensitive. We found that discovery was one of the biggest things, one of the most important things, and also keeping our data classification, data protection kind of processes and I guess our schema for it flexible, so that we can change it as and when we bring in more capabilities or start handling different kinds of data. Say we get cleared to do government work in a different country, we need to handle that data according to the regulations and kind of the sensitivities there. So avoiding temptation to over-engineer things is important, because if you go too far in one way, kind of making it the most resilient and perfect thing possible, it's not going to work. It's going to be more difficult to unpick that and make it work when you actually down the line need to change it. I guess the second thing, which I touched on last time we met as well, was just as a startup, as a company that doesn't have like an internal security team, our security consulting function consult with the business itself, and kind of act as our own internal team, making the most of native tools in native capabilities in whatever tool we're using. So G Suite or Jira or whatever it is, having kind of best practices or patterns documented so that we can just pick those up, tweak them to meet our needs and run with them is great, rather than having to kind of bring in loads of vendors or design new data protection and classification approaches from the ground up.
Fantastic. That's great. And I think another thing that just comes to mind, silly, I never thought about this. Every single tool that we use has some kind of vulnerability or security risk that goes along with it, and as well as the data that's being given there. So I think that's a great insight. We just think about the sheer number of tools, like you said, whether it's Jira, whether it's Trello, whether it's G Suite, which I know you mentioned in the previous conversation. Another thing that we can talk about further later on, or I'm sure Leo will have plenty to say, is that if you're going to be working with a company or a government in another country, how much you have to start learning about the individual regulations that you might be completely unaware of. And like you said, avoiding that temptation to over-engineer things, because if you walk into another country where things are going to be totally different, all of a sudden all that work feels like it's going to waste. Great stuff. Let's keep going. Sal.
So I think there's 2 points on that I think really getting an understanding of how to be security compliant across different sovereign nations and different sovereign nations' definition of that. That's something that's actively coming into play right now. I think it's gotten much more interesting since there's been sort of the push for SBOMs and the definitions of what is valid for an SBOM for different governments. I think that's a really great example of something that we're going to see an expansion and maybe a differentiation of how regulation is dealing with what ultimately is just, from a developer's perspective, a template output, right? So we can standardize that in whatever way makes sense, but that convergence has really yet to happen. But I think is coming into play, less than 2 years. But I think on the other side of that, I think there's something that I'm watching more broadly. I think it's really interesting in the Kubernetes language, but is, something to pay attention across them. There's certain things about, I particularly pay attention to cloud computing, right? Kubernetes, Golang. And in those languages, for Kubernetes particularly, there's certain security concerns, some security permissions that just aren't excellent, but are engineered into the language itself and cannot be engineered out. And so I'd love to see projects really focus on, if we can't make those more secure, how do we get more honest and better about templating those? Because particularly from both open source maintainers that I work with, so I'll work with 12, 15 open source maintainers to try to get their project secure. Both that maintainer and the head of an OSPO right now, both those personalities are dealing with the problem of not being able to identify in Kubernetes exactly how secure they are on any given day because of the ingest stream and knowing how secure their ingests are from other packages. So my concerns really are at that broader level. What are we doing to work across particularly that maintainer level to make sure that that security standard can be ingested in a way that doesn't burden you all so severely? I'm not saying that this is now your new job. Let's solve that systematically.
I think that's a great point. And also, once again, as Jorge kind of explained, is like, look, you're already signing up for a lot as a maintainer. How do you establish, best practices and standards that can be met in a reasonable way without breaking the bank, so to speak, in terms of time and know-how, and making those conversations easier rather than, and now you got to become a security expert. So I think that's a great point. Awesome. Let's keep going, Leo. So we've had, different mentions of, the difficulties in different countries. You've got a pretty solid background on that. If you want to explain a little bit about, things that you've worked on, and then of course touch on the trends that are catching your attention.
Of course. Thank you very much. Well, in the past, I have been working for a while in international relations, dealing with data protection primarily. And one of the projects I was dealing with was creating a sort of international standards on data protection that could be applied all around the world and could simplify all this mess of jurisdictions that we are suffering right now. But of course, this is really, really difficult because, even the approaches that in many countries they have to privacy is absolutely different than the one we have here. For example, in China, this concept does not exist. So you can imagine if the concept is not existing, how can you explain to a guy which is living there that you are trying to protect it, But at the final stage, I'm sure that most of the people working from the human rights and the law point of view on dealing with privacy and all these things focus just on the protection of the data. And if you look at the GDPR, at the regulation we have in Europe, well, it is important to notice that the title is clear. It talks about the protection of personal data, of course, but it also talks about the free movement of such data, and people forget about this, and I think that this is what is leading to many problems on interpretation and on how the laws work. In my opinion, what companies should do is to create internally a common level of protection, which is high enough to comply with the different legislation in which they are trying to work at, and set this high level of protection as the standard for the company. So you can do it from the legal point of view by using a tool which is created in Europe, which is called binding corporate rules, which is a sort of code of conduct that companies can apply internally and set high standards on privacy and so on. So, but this is a lot of bureaucracy that takes a lot of time, and I think that's lawyers and technicians working together and trying to set this common standard in companies could be much more effective than just laws, because I think that this is the way in which we can both protect the data and at the same time allow the data to move freely, which is absolutely critical in this era. That's my thoughts.
Jorge, since you were first and you've been listening to everybody else, in whether it's as a maintainer or in your regular job, how often is it that you find an intersection and conversations going on between folks that are more in the legal background, in the legal domain, also because you work in a multinational, and people that are on the technical side?
Okay. Well, luckily for me, because I hate those conversations, luckily for me, I don't need to have those conversations from legal part, because the best part is that we don't provide any commercial support, neither in my own company. I mean, we are KEDA users in Sparse Group. We use KEDA, but if there is any leak or any problem or any legal compliance, it's not with me. It's their own problem, and they need to talk with the guy who installed KEDA in that specific place. So for me, luckily for me, it's not a common conversation, but I know that folks like Tom Kirkcode, maybe you know about him, works for Microsoft, and he needs to have these conversations with users. And I think that they are complicated because usually users legal part requires a super in-depth standard actions, which are not totally doable in open source project, or maybe just for covering one super edge case, we need to refactor or redo a lot of places. I don't remember. There is a security standard that requires to call a specific endpoint. Sorry, but I don't remember the name. And AWS SDK, for instance, or Azure SDK both support that feature, but maybe Prometheus SDK doesn't support that feature, and those kind of things sometimes are complicated to achieve or to address, because you need to balance adding value with being safe, with protecting data, with not being attached in your design to those things, and sometimes are complicated. The best part about that is that in our specific case, I think that ControlePlane folk have the same situation, but in general, the CNCF umbrella covers us as a CNCF project in security terms, not legally, because obviously when you enter in legal terms, it's complicated. But for instance, we are it's not a secret, we are trying to graduate to be a graduate project in CNCF, and CNCF requires a security audit. So it's a good part, because at the end of the day, we have an official document, an official auditory that, okay, I'm not going to defend that auditory in front of any legal department or any plan or anyone. I'm not going to defend it, but it's public. So if anyone needs to know, okay, is SCADA secure? Is this project secure? Can we use it? How we deal with our data? At the end of the day, the CNCF umbrella covers those kind of things, and it's easy for us. And in my specific case, I don't deal with those things.
No, but I think it's a great example because, that it's an insurance policy and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Yes, Sal.
I'd jump in because I think this is, really my point here is kind of for Leo, because Jorge is talking to exactly the situation that I run into all the time, where consuming open source organizations assume that open source packages are vendors, and they are not. And sometimes, depending on what ecosystem you're in, the majority of them are not vendors, right? And so security in every other sector to this point has been put in place with the language and the understanding that there's a supply chain, because that supply chain was physicalized to an organization, right? If Volvo's supply chain is better than another car company, I can see that. In this case, all of those supply chains now are inside of this big cloud thing called Kubernetes. And I do think there hasn't been a well enough centralized source of support. We've got verification, we've got monitoring. And the best CNCF will do for you right now is help you to monitor your security and sometimes help you get that into place. But even, Jorge, at this level of graduating from CNCF, when you get to the audit stage and you get to that threat model, sometimes they'll dump you off with a threat model and not give you next steps or support. Now, my question there is that sustainable as a strategy for security for an ecosystem? Absolutely not. You need something that closes that gap so I can go to, I want your standard, LDAP compliant, Kubernetes, Prometheus, Grafana, super standard. I want to be able to go to that and know that that's 100% secure when I pull that down from my release. And we can't do that right now. So I'm actually really interested on sort of that legal and compliance side, even though those aren't the same thing. What do you think that's going to look like moving forward? Because these are fundamental, critical infrastructure problems.
I would like to...
Jorge, the only thing I ask for a quick Anglo-Saxon answer.
Yeah. I don't have any answer for this, but I would like to remark that really often users think that open source projects are vendors, as we are not vendors majority of the time. So you are downloading a project, a code that is public, that you could audit and you could modify, but we are not vendors. You shouldn't think that we are vendors, and you shouldn't expect commercial support or any kind of support in your very big problem. When your infrastructure is burning, don't expect any kind of urgent support from an open source organization, because we are not vendors. And that's a really good observation that Sal has done.
I think that's great. And once again as well, it's like you've got the security audit from the CNCF. It's like, look, we get up still here, and then after that you're in charge. You run it. Like you said, it's not a product in that sense. Really quickly, well, I want to hear from Ollie and then also from Leo, just for the sake of time to respect. Oh, and Sylvain dropped off. Sure is dynamic. Ollie, all yours.
I think one of the interesting things about the CNCF and the graduation process is it's a snapshot. It's a point in time, and I don't have the answers to this, obviously, but it raised the question in my mind, like, how do you do continuous compliance with regulation for open source projects through an organization like CNCF? Do you have it on a kind of calendarized basis, or do you do it on major releases? I don't know, but I think that's something that needs to be thought about, because these projects change so fast. Especially in the cloud native space, open source projects are just changing so fast. They do slow down. The release speed does slow down as they mature, but the compliance could change quite a lot between releases or between even yearly audits.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful point, and I think now we can turn over to Leo as well. When people are working on technology, by the very nature of it, there are going to be changes, and when those changes come about, how can it be guaranteed that, once again, the security, data protection, compliance is being brought into the picture in a way that doesn't delay the releases that are going on, and so that it's not forgotten and not seen as being part of the problem, but rather part of the solution. What's been your experience regarding that in terms of, yeah, we get this established now according to the regulations that we see today, but it's in sometimes 6 months or a year or 2 years down the road, how is that going to look? And how can this be done in a way that doesn't stall or cause heavy delays on the project's progress?
That's a good point. Okay, and the problem we have from the point of view of legislation is that it tends to be very rigid. And of course, when lawyers arrive, technology is already implemented. So lawyers are always arriving late. That's what usually happens. So I think that the solution is regulating, taking into account technology neutrality. Setting goals and not specific obligations that allow companies and allow projects such as open source ones to address these objectives, to address these goals, and to move forward by taking into account that, of course, there is law in place, but that it is not possible to comply with every single law in every single jurisdiction, because nobody knows them, and many times there are even contradictory between them. And I'm focusing on the big goals. Of course, what we suggest to programmers and to people which is coming to us in order to ask if their projects comply with, for example, data protection laws and things like these. We usually say them that when you are developing a tool, it's not compulsory that the tool is fully compliant with the laws, but just that it allows people to comply with the law, which is slightly different. For example, you can buy a car that can run up to 250 kilometers per hour and speed, and this is illegal in practically all jurisdictions. But companies are producing these cars. Why are they doing so? Well, because the car can go at 50, can go at 70, can go at 120, and can go at any speed that the driver wants. And I think that with technology, the approach should be similar. Okay, you can develop a tool which allows to do lots of things. Maybe some of them are not legal in some jurisdictions, but insofar as this tool is flexible enough to be adapted to all the specific cases and allow the user to modify the tool in the case of open source, or even to set up such tool in a way that is usable under this jurisdiction, this would be enough. When drafting the GDPR, I was involved in the drafting project of the GDPR representing Spain at the very beginning of this process. Afterwards, politicians enter into the drafting of the laws, and you know how this works. But in the legal first approach, I was there, and they were arguing that would be very good to force developers to obtain some kind of certification on and compliance with GDPR and things like this. And from our part, we were absolutely against this kind of initiatives, because we think that this is not useful. What is useful is that you can convince, or you can show your clients that it is possible to comply with the law with your tools. And afterwards, who is using the tool, who is setting up the tool, and who is deciding what to do with the tool is the user, is the end user. So the responsibility is in the end user. Of course, if your software is good enough to allow the user to take decisions on this, and it's not forcing to something which is not legal. And this is our approach when dealing with software, I think that it's not so rigid, and this is why laws shouldn't be very explicit on setting requirements for software and things like this. Principles such as privacy by design are really good, because what they try to do is to force you to introduce privacy in the requirements of your software, and developing something which is capable to comply with law. And I think that this is the point.
Fantastic insights, and I think once again the issue of ownership, of control, of responsibility, where does that lie? Since we're already a bit over time, and thanks to everybody for staying on, just want to be thinking about what are things that we can be considering for future conversations. I've been taking notes, Sylvain's been taking notes, but if there's anything that you would like us to keep in mind, questions, Sal, thank you for sharing that link. These are the things that are going to be helpful so that we know that we're focusing on the topics where there's a lot of ground to be covered. It's obvious that with a lot of things we're talking about today, it's a reminder of why these conversations are important, because there's uncertainty, there's doubts, there's a feeling of being overwhelmed that I feel like I have to learn all these things. I can get in a lot of trouble. Leo, in your case as well, working with a lot of startups that, are trying to do things correctly. They're thinking about scaling internationally. And in order to be, getting their go-to-market strategy ready and things like that, feeling, I have no idea even where to start on this, but I know it's very important. I think there's been a lot of stuff shared today that's been very positive in that regard. In Jorge's case as well, seeing, when an open source project gets started, what are the legal considerations that have to be minded? It's one thing if it's a project in the CNCF. If we look at other open source foundations, it's going to be different. Slightly different flavors that might be encountered there. As Leo mentioned as well, how explicit does the law need to be, or is it more there as a guiding force and reminding folks, who stands on which side? Lots of great insights being shared today. So if there's anything that we haven't talked about so far, just really quickly, you can either turn on your mic and share it or leave it in the chat, because we want to know what are the topics that would be best to keep in mind. Sal, go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in right on that because I think we're right at the cusp of what my biggest issue right now is that on the legislation side, intent, absolutely observable, but oftentimes the acts, these No Resilience Act, a lot of it's getting closer and closer to actually being technically empathetic to what can be done with the state of the internet as it exists. So what I'm really interested in is where are the conversations being had? And if they're not being had because I can't find them, where are we going to have a conversation about what metadata is appropriate to hold and track for a digital object on the internet? How much of that do we want to track, and when and why does it make sense to track that? Because there's examples now where we're seeing, when GDPR came in, when you tried to retrofact that onto a system, absolutely not possible. The best thing we got out of that was the ability to tick a box to, state our own rights. And I think that's a great practice. But we're in a different situation now with this total supply chain and asks like SBOM, which are actually radically over-engineered for most conditions that they're set out to support. So I'm interested, where are we going to go to get to a point where my regulation document is paired to a README document so that I can save myself years of translating the gap between as an organization.
Excellent. And once again, plenty of things to go further on there. Any other thoughts before we wrap it up?
So one of the thoughts that came up, I guess, from an engineering perspective is there are standards for APIs, for metrics and telemetry and that sort of thing. And I just wonder how possible it would be to develop some kind of standard for just creating an API endpoint that's exposed on a piece of open source software or proprietary software that just gives you a snapshot of compliance with various different standards and regulations that's kind of stored in code that's kept up to date with the configuration of that particular instance of the software. So in a sort of maybe from a DevSecOps or sort of continuous monitoring approach, you can tell if someone's gone in, an admin's gone in and changed a setting that has suddenly made data public. You don't need to wait till the next audit. That'll appear at this /compliance endpoint. And that format is standardized across different tools. Just a bit of blue sky thinking, to use the consulting term.
No, but still, this is where the a casual conversation on a Thursday turned into $1 billion startup with that idea. So thank you, Ollie, for giving that information for free. We appreciate that. We are transparent here. This is being recorded, so we don't have to worry about remembering everything you said. That's brilliant. I think that's lovely. And that's the thing is that how much, we talk a lot about automation. How can this be done so that it doesn't have to be every 6 months when there's an audit, that these things can just be detected and there's more transparency if there are changes made, who made them and when did they happen. So I think that's great. Good. Leo, you want to say something as well?
It was just a little joke. Just to say, Jorge, that talking with lawyers is not as terrible.
If we accomplished anything today, we got Jorge in the same room as a lawyer, and that's wonderful. But I think it's really, really good to hear Jorge's perspective, also being so honest and authentic and transparent, of saying, I'm really happy that I don't have to deal with this stuff. And that's, once again, the pain points for stakeholders when they feel they're being dragged into conversations where it's like, look, I'm a programmer, I'm a maintainer. It should be out of sight, out of mind. At the same time, is that it is 2023, and how much do we really trust a lot of the different agencies and companies that are out there with the data that's being shared? How much are we aware of when classic things that when we agree to terms and conditions, what's going to be done? As was brought up earlier too, all the tools that we're using. All right, we're willingly signing up, we're paying on a subscription basis, we're giving away lots of information. What is being done with that, and what is being done to protect it? Where does it become our responsibility, and where is it theirs? Lots of big questions there, and then also things that are more on the technical side. I think Jorge is ready to go have, for those of you that aren't in Spain, it's a tradition on Thursdays to go have a social time and have a, what we call it in the Basque country, pincho pote. Jorge, you're going to do that today.
It's not jueves, it's juevincho. It's not...
So, yeah, we also say jueves, which is a combination of Thursday and Friday. So anyway, this is really good, and thank you very, very much